There's a photograph I once saw in a Victorian archive. A woman, back straight as a knife's edge, hands folded perfectly in her lap, eyes forward. The caption mentioned she had buried 3 children that year. 3. And yet, in that photograph you would never know. Not a tear. Not a tremor. Not a single crack in the porcelain mask of composure she wore. And I remember thinking, how did they do it? How did Victorian women walk through rooms filled with whispers about their scandals, their losses, their failures, and never once let their shoulders fall? Never once let the world see them break. Because here's what nobody tells you about the Victorian era. It wasn't just about corsets and tea parties. It was about survival. And the women who survived. They knew something we've forgotten. They knew that posture, real posture, wasn't about standing straight. It was about staying whole when everything inside you was shattered. Let me take you back. London, 1873. Imagine you're a woman in that world. Your husband has just gambled away your family's fortune. The creditors are coming. The neighbors already know. You can feel their eyes on you every time you step outside. Your children are asking questions you can't answer. Your mother-in-law is making pointed comments about your management of the household. And tomorrow you have to attend a charity luncheon. You have to sit there, smile, make polite conversation, and pretend that your entire world isn't collapsing around you. What do you do? Because you can't cancel. Canceling would be an admission. It would be blood in the water. The other women would circle. The invitations would stop. Your daughter's prospects for good marriages. In Victorian society, the moment you showed weakness, the moment your posture cracked, you became invisible. Or worse, you became a cautionary tale. So the women of that era developed something. A technology of survival. And it started with the body. There was a saying among Victorian mothers when teaching their daughters how to navigate society. They would place a book on the girl's head and say, "A lady's spine is her first line of defense. Not her wit. Not her charm. Her spine." Because they understood something that modern psychology is only now beginning to prove. The way you hold your body doesn't just reflect your emotional state. Creates it. When you force your shoulders back, when you lift your chin, when you keep your spine straight even when everything in you wants to curl inward and hide, something happens in your brain. Your nervous system reads the signal. It thinks, we're not in danger. We're standing tall. We must be okay. It's called embodied cognition. And Victorian women were masters of it, long before it had a name. But here's where it gets dark. Because this wasn't just about standing up straight. This was about creating an entire physical architecture of denial. A body that could lie so convincingly that even the woman inside it started to believe the lie. Let me tell you about the posture devices. You've probably heard of corsets. Everyone talks about corsets. But what they don't talk about are the other things. The backboards. Long wooden planks that governesses would strap to young girls' backs during lessons. 4 hours. The metal posture collars that women wore under their high-neck dresses, devices that made it physically impossible to look down, to slouch, to show submission. And then there were the more intimate methods. The ones whispered about in ladies' magazines under the guise of health advice. There was a technique called the discipline of breath. When a woman felt tears coming, when grief or rage or humiliation threatened to overwhelm her, she was taught to control her breathing in a very specific way. Shallow breaths, high in the chest. Never deep. Never from the diaphragm. Because deep breathing, they believed, stirred up emotions. Made them uncontrollable. So instead they breathed like birds. Quick, light, almost panting. It created a state of mild hypoxia. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to create a foggy distance between the woman and her feelings. Enough to make the pain feel far away. Manageable. And it worked. God help them, it worked. There are diary entries from women of that era that describe this practice in heartbreaking detail. One woman, a widow named Eleanor, wrote, "I have perfected the art of breathing in such a manner that I can attend my husband's funeral and feel nothing at all. I stand at the graveside, and it is as if I am watching someone else's tragedy. Is this strength, or have I simply become very good at dying while still walking?" That line haunts me. Because that's what this Victorian secret really was, wasn't it? Not strength. Not resilience. It was dissociation, wrapped in silk and whalebone and sold as virtue. But here's the thing. Here's the terrible, complicated thing that we have to sit with. To work. In that context, in that brutal social ecosystem where a woman's survival depended on her reputation, where one visible crack could destroy not just her life but her children's futures. It worked. These women walked through hell in heels and never stumbled. They buried babies and attended dinner parties the same evening. They endured loveless marriages and financial ruin and social exile. And they never, ever let their posture slip. And some of them genuinely found a kind of peace in it. A strange, dissociated peace, but peace nonetheless. There's a concept in Victorian literature called the angel in the house. The perfect woman. Self-sacrificing, serene, always composed. And we modern readers look at that ideal and see oppression. We see women being crushed under impossible standards. But some Victorian women looked at that ideal and saw armor. If I can become the angel, they thought, if I can make my body so perfect, my posture so impeccable that no one can find fault with me, then maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I'll survive. And the most successful women, the ones who navigated that world with the most grace, they weren't the ones who rebelled. They were the ones who mastered the performance, who learned to hold their bodies like weapons, who understood that posture wasn't about submission. It was about control. Let me give you an example. There was a woman named Catherine Gladstone, wife of the Prime Minister. By all accounts, she lived through multiple personal tragedies, miscarriages, the deaths of children, public scandals involving her husband's indiscretions. And yet, in every photograph, every public appearance, every recorded account, she was described the same way. Remarkably composed. Dignified beyond measure. A woman of extraordinary posture. But her private letters tell a different story. She wrote to a friend, "I have trained my body so thoroughly in the art of not feeling that I sometimes wonder if I'm still alive at all. I can stand in a room full of people who pity me, and my spine never bends. But when I'm alone, I cannot remember how to weep. The tears won't come. I've forgotten the way. That's the cost." That's what the Victorian secret demanded. You could maintain your posture through anything, but the price was the loss of access to your own inner world. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because modern neuroscience has actually studied this. They've looked at what happens in the brain when people chronically suppress emotions while maintaining rigid body posture. And what they found is disturbing. The body keeps the score, as they say. When you force your spine straight while your heart is breaking, when you shallow breathe your way through trauma, when you train your face into a mask of composure while screaming inside. Your nervous system doesn't forget. It stores all of that. In your muscles, in your fascia, in the chronic tension that eventually becomes just the way your body is. Victorian women suffered from an epidemic of what they called hysteria and nervous disorders. Mystery illnesses that doctors couldn't explain. Fainting spells. Paralysis with no physical cause. Chronic pain. Digestive issues. We know now what those were. They were the body's rebellion. The stored trauma finding a way out. But here's what I find myself thinking about. Late at night, when I'm alone with these histories, we look back at Victorian women and we pity them. We think how awful, how oppressive, how tragic that they had to live that way. And yet, how many of us are doing the exact same thing? How many of us have perfected the art of walking into work with a smile when we're falling apart inside? How many of us have learned to keep our voices steady during breakups, our faces neutral during humiliations, our bodies upright during grief? We don't have governesses strapping boards to our backs anymore. But we have something else. We have the pressure of social media perfection. The culture of never let them see you sweat. The hustle mentality that treats vulnerability as weakness. We've traded whalebone corsets for Spanx and self-optimization. We've swapped Victorian etiquette manuals for personal branding strategies. But the core belief, the idea that survival depends on never showing the cracks, that's still there. A lady's spine is her first line of defense. We're still saying that. We've just updated the vocabulary. And maybe there's something useful in the Victorian approach. Not the toxic parts, not the complete emotional suppression, but the understanding that sometimes, when everything is falling apart, the simple act of standing straight can be a radical act of defiance. Sometimes, keeping your posture when you're wounded isn't about denial. It's about refusing to let the wound define you. It's about saying, this thing happened to me, hurt me, but it doesn't own me. I'm still here. I'm still standing. There's a technique that modern therapists actually use now, adapted from old Victorian practices. It's called power posing. You stand in a position of physical confidence, shoulders back, chin up, taking up space, for just 2 minutes. And studies show it actually changes your hormone levels, reduces cortisol, increases testosterone, makes you feel more capable. The Victorians didn't know about hormones, but they knew it worked. The question is, how do we use this knowledge without falling into the trap they fell into? How do we maintain our posture without losing touch with our pain? Because that's the real secret, isn't it? The one the Victorian women never quite figured out. You can't just suppress your way to strength. Eventually the body rebels. Eventually the cost becomes too high. True posture, the kind that actually sustains you, isn't about denial. It's about integration. It's about being able to say, yes, I'm wounded. Yes, I'm in pain. And also I'm standing. Both things are true. There's a scene in a Victorian novel, I forget which one, where a woman is described as having the posture of someone who had learned to carry grief the way other women carry parcels. Carefully, but without pretending the weight wasn't there. That's it. That's the evolution of the Victorian secret. We learn from their mistakes. We honor their resilience without romanticizing their suffering. We practice standing tall while also practicing feeling deeply. Because the modern world needs us to do something the Victorian women couldn't. Needs us to be both strong and soft. To maintain our dignity while also maintaining our humanity. Your spine can be straight and your eyes can be wet with tears. Those aren't contradictions. They're the full reality of being human. So here's what I take from those women in the photographs. The ones with perfect posture and hidden pain. I take their strength. Their refusal to crumble under pressure. Their understanding that sometimes the body can lead the mind into courage. But I leave behind their silence. Their isolation. Their belief that showing a crack meant total collapse. We can stand tall even when wounded. But we don't have to stand alone. We don't have to pretend the wound doesn't exist. A lady's spine is her first line of defense. But it doesn't have to be her only one. The Victorian women showed us that posture is power. Now we get to show them what comes next. Posture with presence. Strength with softness. Standing tall while also standing in our truth. That's the secret they were reaching for but never quite found. And maybe, just maybe, we can find it for them.